Hello, people of grace. For our Pastoral Connect today, I would like to talk about something I call an emotionally clean palate. Emotionally clean palate. And to really talk about that, we have to start in the right place and start with a celebration. If we want to feel emotionally released, emotionally in a good place, that really starts with the love of God and the joy that that brings. And so we celebrate God's heart. And that God is able to start each day with an emotionally clean palate. Here's how we know that. Let's look at Psalm 103, verse 11 through 12. For as high as the heavens are above the earth, so great is God's steadfast love for his people, for those who reverence, who fear him. But then the balancing thought of that is because his love is so great, God is able to do this. As far as the east is from the west, so far does he remove our transgressions from us. And that shows God's heart, and that in the highest and most noble kind of love, what we often call agape love, is this incredible ability to remove the sense of hurt or sin from the person that you love and start fresh with them. As God says often in the scriptures, his mercies are new every morning. That's God's heart. God's heart doesn't change. But as Martin Luther, I think, summarized well, we tend to relate to God from a place of law or grace. And we all start with law. And maybe we need to start there. But when you have rules, when you have law, when you have lines strongly drawn, the short answer to all of that is that we end up on the wrong side of the line. And so that deal doesn't work for us. So we can celebrate God's heart, but if we want to gain God's heart, we have to make a new deal. Law, performance, even what we might call morals, it's not enough to keep us emotionally clean. And God tells us this himself. Even the law that he established, the old covenant, he says in Jeremiah 31, hundreds of years before that covenant is brought into the new covenant through the work of Christ, God says, their sins and lawless acts I will remember no more. What does that mean when it says that God doesn't remember? Intellectually, cognitively, he knows everything. He cannot not know. He's omniscient. But in a way that we might experience more as what we call emotionally or even bodily, God forgets. And that's what I mean by an emotionally clean palate. When he brings in his new covenant through the work of Christ, not law, the law came through Moses, but grace. Grace came through Jesus Christ, John tells us in John chapter 1, that he can now forget all of our sins, all of the hurts. We truly have a new beginning. God has, through the work of the cross, resolved his suffering, his grief, his loss, his anger that is even associated with that pain. And the cross satisfies him. That's grace. So we celebrate God's heart, but we need to make a new deal. God made a new deal with us, not law, but grace. So how do we bring that down to how we live every day? Well, some of that's a pretty deep discussion and even individualized discussion from person to person. But Paul summarizes it for us in Philippians chapter 3, verse 13, when looking at all the loss he had suffered, things that maybe he even boasted in that got in the way of him knowing Christ, Paul says this one thing I do, forgetting what is behind, pressing on toward what is ahead. We can celebrate God's heart, but celebrating God's heart's not enough. We have to make a new deal. We have to figure out how to live out in our lives what God did in the plan of salvation to move from law to grace. And we do that by bringing a very intentional emotional energy and focus to forgetting what is behind. Well, we can't make ourselves intellectually forget something. Again, Paul's giving an emotional language. He's let it go. He's worked through the grief and the pain. When he says forgetting, he doesn't even use like an intellectual term for forget. He uses this idea of it's hidden, it's unaware, I'm ignorant of it. Except he's not ignorant of it. The way we think of ignorant, if you look at Philippians 3, Paul's just listed a bunch of things. He can remember them, but emotionally, he's past it. He's forward thinking. For us to live forward, to live forgiving, to live free, to be emotionally clean or pure, to gain that blessedness of the pure in heart, for they see God, we have to be very forward thinking. Our best days are in front of us because heaven is in front of us. And we have to release everything that pulls us emotionally backward. Usually, we only do that when we learn how to process loss well, which Paul had to do in Philippians 3. But living forward, living forgiving, living free is an emotionally clean and beautiful and lightness of being place to be. That's encouraging. That's worth the effort. And that is knowing Christ and the power of his resurrection. Have a blessed evening.